I'm Flora, 32 years old, and I was supposed to be having the happiest day of my life. Standing in the church vestibule in my white dress, I kept checking my phone waiting for my parents to arrive. Instead, I got a text that made my stomach drop. Enjoy marrying your plumber. We won't be embarrassed with you. My hands shook, but I took a deep breath. Jake was worth it. If you're watching this from a place where family has let you down, hit like and subscribe. And stick around to see what photo I sent that made my parents call me in a panic. Growing up in the prestigious Oakwood Hills neighborhood of Boston meant certain expectations were placed on my shoulders from day one. My father, Thomas Wilson, was not just any surgeon. He was the head of cardiothoracic surgery at Massachusetts General, someone whose name appeared in medical journals and whose opinion was sought by doctors across the country. My mother, Diane Wilson, built her reputation as one of the top corporate attorneys in the state, representing clients whose names regularly appeared in Fortune 500 lists. Our sprawling colonial home with its perfectly manicured lawn and imported marble countertops was more a showpiece than a home. Family photos that lined the staircase were carefully curated. Everyone smiling, everyone perfect, everyone successful. There was no room for failure or even mediocrity in the Wilson household. My older sister, Penelope, understood the game early. She was 4 years older and infinitely better at being a Wilson. Her report cards were pinned to the refrigerator, straight, as of course. Her trophies from debate tournaments and science competitions filled an entire shelf in our father's study. When she announced she was applying to Harvard Medical School following directly in our father's footsteps, you would have thought she'd single-handedly cured cancer from the celebration that followed. I was always the odd one out. While Penelope studied anatomy textbooks for fun, I was drawing in sketchbooks that I hid under my mattress. When she was volunteering at the hospital to pad her college applications, I was sneaking off to community art classes. It wasn't that I wasn't smart. I maintained an A- average through sheer survival instinct, but I asked questions my parents found inconvenient. Why does it matter what the Hendersons think about our new car? I asked my mother once when I was 12. Because perception is reality, Flora, she replied without looking up from her legal briefs. People like us maintain certain standards. People like us. That phrase followed me throughout my childhood and teenage years. People like us attend Ivy League schools. People like us become doctors, lawyers, or at the very least business executives. People like us marry other people like us. When I announced my intention to major in art education rather than pre-med or pre-law, the temperature in our house dropped 20 degrees. My father barely spoke to me for weeks. "You're throwing away your potential," he finally said over dinner one night. "Do you know how many people would kill for your opportunities?" "I want to inspire children through art," I said. "That's not throwing anything away." My mother set down her fork with surgical precision. Teaching finger painting to elementary school children is not a career worthy of a Wilson. The summer I graduated from college, not Harvard but Boston University, another disappointment. My sister Penelope got engaged to Andrew, a neurosurgeon she met in medical school. Their wedding planning consumed the family for the next year. My parents spent over $200,000 on a lavish ceremony and reception at the Boston Harbor Hotel. 300 guests, a 10-piece orchestra, imported flowers, custom everything. I spent that year hearing endless comparisons. Penelope found the most exquisite wedding dress at Bergdorf, my mother would announce over Sunday brunch. The designer came in specially to do her fittings. Or my father showing his colleagues' wedding venue photos. Nothing but the best for my daughter and her fiancé, two brilliant doctors starting their life together. I stood beside Penelope as her maid of honor in a dress that cost more than 3 months of my teacher's salary, watching my parents beam with pride throughout the ceremony. At the reception, my father gave a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes, talking about how Penelope had always made them proud, how she represented the very best of the Wilson family legacy. "To my perfect daughter and her perfect match," he concluded, raising his champagne flute. I clapped until my hands hurt, genuinely happy for my sister who had always been kind to me despite our differences. But I couldn't help wondering if my father would ever look at my life choices with even a fraction of that pride. After the wedding, the contrast between how my parents treated us became even more stark. Sunday family dinners became a showcase for Penelope and Andrew's accomplishments at the hospital. My stories about my art students were met with polite nods before the conversation quickly shifted back to medicine or law. "That's nice, dear," my mother would say after I shared about a breakthrough with a struggling student, then turning to Penelope. "Now tell us more about that challenging procedure you assisted with yesterday." I started attending these dinners less and less frequently. Each visit left me feeling smaller, less significant, as though I was constantly auditioning for a role in my own family and failing to get the part. What I didn't realize then was that the greatest test of my relationship with my parents was still to come, and it would arrive in the form of a plumbing emergency and the man who fixed it. It was a Tuesday evening in January when my kitchen sink decided to stage a rebellion. Water was everywhere, soaking through cabinets and spreading across my apartment floor. After frantically turning off the water main and throwing every towel I owned onto the flood, I searched for emergency plumbers on my phone. Most were unavailable or charging triple for after-hours service. Just when I was about to give up, I found Sullivan Plumbing Services with a 5-star rating and a promise of 24-hour service. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, said a deep voice on the phone. True to his word, exactly half an hour later, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find a tall man with warm brown eyes and a friendly smile, toolbox in hand, wearing a navy blue uniform with Sullivan Plumbing embroidered on the pocket. "Jake Sullivan," he said, extending his hand. "Heard you're having a water situation." "Flora Wilson," I replied, leading him to the kitchen disaster zone. That's putting it mildly. Jake assessed the situation with calm efficiency, explaining what had happened with my garbage disposal and how he would fix it. There was something immediately appealing about the way he worked, confident focus, taking pride in his craft. No wasted movements, no unnecessary words, just pure competence. "So, you're the owner?" I asked, noticing his name matched the company. He nodded while adjusting something under the sink. "Started the business 5 years ago. It's just me and 2 other guys right now, but we're growing." "That's impressive," I said sincerely. Jake looked up, seeming slightly surprised by my genuine interest. "Most people don't find plumbing very impressive." "Creating something from nothing is always impressive," I replied. "I'm an art teacher. I understand building things that matter." 2 hours later, my kitchen was dry, my sink was functional, and Jake and I were still talking, having moved from plumbing to art to our favorite places in Boston. When he finally packed up his tools, he hesitated at the door. "I don't usually do this with clients," he said, "but would you like to get coffee sometime?" I surprised myself by immediately saying yes. Our first date was at a small diner near my school. Nothing fancy, just good food and better conversation. Jake was unlike anyone I'd ever dated. The men my parents had subtly pushed me toward were always from the same mold, ambitious professionals with prestigious degrees and carefully curated social media profiles. Jake was refreshingly real. He talked about his work with genuine enthusiasm, describing the satisfaction of solving problems and helping people in tangible ways. "A lot of folks look down on trade work," he said, "but at the end of every day I can point to something I fixed or improved. Can't always say that about jobs with fancier titles." As we continued dating, I learned more about his story. Jake came from a working-class family in South Boston. His father had been a construction worker, his mother a nurse's aide. They had taught him the value of hard work and integrity. After high school, he apprenticed with a master plumber while taking business classes at community college at night. "I wanted to understand both sides," he explained. "The technical skills and the business knowledge to build something lasting." By 25, he had earned his master plumber license and saved enough to start his own company. Now at 34, his business was thriving with a growing list of residential and commercial clients. What struck me most about Jake was his absolute comfort in his own skin. He didn't apologize for his profession or try to impress people with things that didn't matter to him. His confidence came from knowing his own worth, not from others' validation, something I was still learning. After 3 months of dating, I finally worked up the courage to introduce Jake to my parents. I suggested a dinner at a neutral location, an upscale restaurant downtown that would meet my parents' standards while not being so pretentious that Jake would feel uncomfortable. The evening was tense from the start. My father's handshake was perfunctory, my mother's smile tight. The interrogation began immediately. "So Jacob, my father said, emphasizing the formal version of his name that no one used. Flora tells us, "You're in maintenance work." Plumbing, Jake corrected easily. "I own Sullivan Plumbing Services. We handle residential and commercial projects throughout Greater Boston." "How?" "Hands-on," my mother commented as if he'd said he wrestled alligators for a living. Throughout dinner, my parents asked pointed questions about his education, his family background, his long-term career aspirations, as if running his own successful business wasn't aspiration enough. Jake answered each question with polite dignity, either not noticing or choosing to ignore the condescension behind them. When Jake excused himself to take an emergency call from a client, my mother leaned across the table. "Flora, he seems like a nice enough young man, but surely you can't be serious about him. Have you met Richard Montgomery's son? He just made partner at his law firm and he's single." "I'm not interested in Richard Montgomery's son, mother. I'm dating Jake." "Dating is one thing," my father interjected. "But you should be thinking about your future. What would people think if you settled for this?" The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of tight smiles and forced conversation. When we left, Jake took my hand and didn't mention my parents' behavior until we were in his truck. "They weren't what I expected," he said simply. "I'm sorry," I whispered, mortified. "They were awful." He shrugged. "They're protecting what they value. They just don't realize you and I might value different things." Over the next year and a half, Jake became my sanctuary. With him, I could just be Flora, not Dr. Wilson's disappointing daughter or the family's artistic black sheep. His family embraced me immediately. Sunday dinners at his parents' modest home in South Boston were filled with laughter, good food, and genuine interest in each other's lives. His mother, Margaret, taught me to make her famous apple pie. His father, Robert, always asked about my students and remembered their names from one story to the next. Meanwhile, my own parents increased their efforts to separate us. My mother would accidentally invite eligible bachelors to family events where I brought Jake. My father sent me articles about the importance of compatible backgrounds in successful marriages. When these tactics didn't work, they became more direct. "He's not right for you, Flora," my father said during one particularly tense dinner. "You come from different worlds." "Maybe I prefer his world," I replied. Jake never pushed me to choose between him and my family. Instead, he supported my attempts to bridge the gap while helping me build the confidence to stand my ground when necessary. After 18 months together on a simple autumn day, Jake took me to Boston Public Garden, where we'd had our third date. He spread a checkered blanket under a maple tree, blazing with red leaves, unpacked a picnic lunch. He'd prepared himself and pulled out a small velvet box. "I'm not a complicated man, Flora," he said, his eyes serious. "I know what I want, and it's you. Every day for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" The ring was perfect, not flashy or ostentatious, but a beautiful antique sapphire that had belonged to his grandmother. I said yes through happy tears, knowing with absolute certainty that I was choosing the right path, even if it wasn't the one my parents had mapped out for me. What I didn't know was how far my parents would go to express their disapproval of that choice. The day after Jake proposed, I called my parents with what should have been joyful news. I'd spent the morning rehearsing what to say, hoping that maybe, just maybe, they would finally see how happy Jake made me. "Mom, Dad," I said. When they answered on speakerphone, "I have some exciting news. Jake proposed yesterday, and I said yes." The silence that followed stretched for so long I thought the call had dropped. "I see," my father finally said, his voice clinically detached. "That's quite a development. When were you thinking of having this ceremony?" My mother asked, emphasizing the word as if discussing a root canal. "We haven't set a date yet. I was hoping we could all get together this weekend to celebrate and talk about plans." Another pause. "Yes, we should discuss this in person," my mother said. "Come for dinner on Saturday. Just you, Flora. Jake is my fiancé. He should be part of this conversation." "Fine," my father cut in. "Bring him, 6 o'clock. They hung up before I could respond. Jake held me as I cried, not from joy as a newly engaged woman should, but from the pain of once again failing to meet my parents' expectations. Saturday's dinner was a diplomatic disaster. We'd barely sat down when my mother launched her opening salvo. "We've given this some thought," she began, cutting her chicken with surgical precision. If you're determined to go through with this, we have some conditions for our participation." My father nodded. "We're willing to pay for a respectable wedding at the Westbrook Country Club. Small but elegant. However, we would prefer if the occupational details were kept discreet." Occupational details, Jake asked, though we both knew exactly what they meant. "Your profession," my mother clarified. "Perhaps we could list you as a business owner in the announcements. No need to specify the nature of the business." I stared at them incredulous. "You want us to lie about Jake being a plumber?" "Not lie," my father countered smoothly. "Just emphasize the entrepreneurial aspects rather than the manual labor components." Jake set down his fork with remarkable composure. "With all due respect, Dr. and Mrs. Wilson, I'm proud of what I do. I won't pretend to be something I'm not, especially on our wedding day." My mother's smile tightened. "You might reconsider when you realize the guest list will include several prominent families who could significantly impact your business prospects. First impressions matter in our circle." "Our circle," I repeated. "That's the problem right there. You care more about what your friends think than about my happiness." "Don't be dramatic, Flora," my father said. "We're simply trying to smooth the path forward. Your sister understood the importance of maintaining certain standards." And there it was, the inevitable comparison to Penelope's perfect society wedding. For the next hour, they outlined their vision. They would handle everything from the venue to the guest list to the menu. All Jake and I had to do was show up and play our parts in the Wilson family performance. And of course, my mother added casually we'd prefer if Jake's guest list was kept manageable, perhaps just immediate family. That was the breaking point. "No," I said firmly, "we're not doing this. Jake and I will plan our own wedding on our own terms with our own money." My parents exchanged glances. "Be reasonable, Flora," my mother said. "On a teacher's salary and what Jake makes from his work, what kind of wedding could you possibly afford?" "One with actual love in it," I replied, standing up. "Thank you for dinner, but we're leaving now." In the car, Jake took my hand. "Are you sure about this? It's a lot of money to walk away from." "I'm sure about you," I said. "Everything else is just details." The contrast between my wedding planning experience and my sister's couldn't have been more stark. Where Penelope had been given carte blanche with a limitless budget, Jake and I scrimped and saved. Where she had our mother calling in favors from high society connections, we had Jake's mother, Margaret, helping us find affordable alternatives. Where Penelope had professional wedding planners, we had late nights around our kitchen table with spreadsheets and DIY inspiration. My parents' opposition escalated from passive-aggressive comments to outright ultimatums. They made it clear that if we proceeded with our embarrassingly modest wedding plans, they would consider it a deliberate rejection of family values. The confrontation came to a head 3 months before the wedding date. I had stopped by their house to leave an invitation, hoping against hope that they might reconsider their position. "We simply cannot introduce our friends to a plumber son-in-law," my mother declared, handing the envelope back to me unopened. "I won't subject myself to those conversations." "He owns his own successful business," I countered. "He works hard, treats me with respect, and makes me happier than I've ever been. Why isn't that enough?" "Because we raised you for better things," my father said. "This is a choice to step down in the world, and we won't endorse it." I looked around the immaculate living room with its careful arrangements of status symbols, the original artwork, the antique furniture, the family photos, showing only perfect moments. How empty it all seemed suddenly. "If you can't accept the man I love, then you're choosing not to be part of my life," I said quietly. "The invitation stands. I hope you'll change your minds." As I drove away, I called Jake in tears. He listened, then said simply, "Come home. We'll figure this out together." Home. Not my parents' showpiece house, but the cozy apartment Jake and I shared, filled with a jumble of his practical tools and my colorful artwork. That night he held me while I cried, then helped me make a list of everything we still needed to do for the wedding. With my parents effectively boycotting the event, Jake's family stepped up in ways that still bring tears to my eyes when I think about it. His mother organized a wedding shower with my friends from work. His father offered to walk me down the aisle. His aunts, uncles, and cousins volunteered for everything from arranging flowers to setting up chairs at the reception venue, a charming community hall we'd found that fit our budget. We planned a ceremony that reflected who we really were. Instead of expensive orchids, we chose wildflowers from a local farm. Rather than hiring a gourmet caterer, we worked with a family-owned restaurant Jake had helped renovate after a pipe burst. My dress came from a vintage shop, not designer but perfectly me, with its simple lines and subtle beading. Every detail was meaningful, intentional, and authentically ours. Despite the ongoing pain of my parents' rejection, I found myself genuinely excited about our wedding day. Jake and I were creating something real together, something built on love rather than appearances. 2 weeks before the wedding, my mother called. For a moment, my heart leapt with hope. "We've heard about your arrangements," she said, her voice tight. "If you're still determined to go through with this, we might consider attending. But we won't participate. And we certainly won't host the reception at our club as you'd originally wanted." I took a deep breath. "We never asked to have it at your club, Mom. We've planned everything already. You're welcome to come as guests, but this is our wedding, not a social climbing opportunity." The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, she said, "We'll think about it," and hung up. I knew then that they probably wouldn't come. Still, as the day approached, I left them voicemails with the final details. Part of me kept hoping for a last-minute change of heart, a recognition that family should mean more than social status. But another part had already begun to accept that the people surrounding us on our wedding day would be those who truly supported our relationship, and maybe that was exactly as it should be. What I didn't expect was just how deeply their final rejection would cut, or how their absence would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. The morning of my wedding day dawned with perfect early summer sunshine. I woke up in my best friend Sarah's guest room following the tradition of not seeing the groom before the ceremony. For a few blissful moments, I just lay there watching dust motes dance in the sunbeams, thinking about becoming Jake's wife by the end of the day. Then reality crashed back as my phone chimed with a text from Jake. "Any word from your parents?" I checked my call log. No missed calls. No new voicemails. No messages. "Nothing yet," I replied, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. "They might just show up. Mom always says being fashionably late is a sign of good breeding." Sarah appeared in the doorway with coffee and a determined smile. "Today is about you and Jake," she said firmly, reading my expression. "Everyone who matters will be there." She was right, of course. Jake's parents had been incredibly supportive, his mother helping me with my hair and makeup since I'd canceled the professional stylist to save money. His sisters had arranged a beautiful breakfast spread. Friends from work had transformed the small church with fairy lights and flowers the night before. Still, as Sarah helped me into my vintage wedding dress, I couldn't stop checking my phone. At 10:30, with the ceremony scheduled for 11, I finally broke down and called my parents' house. The housekeeper answered. "They left early this morning, Miss Flora. For the country club, I believe." My hands trembled as I hung up. The country club. On my wedding day. Not to attend, but to deliberately avoid it. I tried both their cell phones, straight to voicemail. I left one final message on my mother's phone. "Mom, the ceremony starts in 30 minutes. Please tell me you're on your way." Margaret Sullivan, Jake's mother, found me staring out the church window 15 minutes before the ceremony was due to begin. Her kind face creased with concern as she took in my expression. "They're not coming, are they?" she asked gently. I shook my head, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. She took my hands in hers. "I know I'm not your mother, Flora, but I want you to know how proud I am to have you joining our family today. Jake has never been happier than he's been with you." I hugged her tightly, drawing strength from her genuine affection. Then I picked up my phone one last time and texted both my parents. "The ceremony is about to start. I've saved you seats at the front. Please come." At 11:15, with all our guests seated and waiting, I stood in the church vestibule, clutching my small bouquet of wildflowers. Robert Sullivan, Jake's father, waited beside me, ready to walk me down the aisle. The organist had played the introductory music twice already. Everyone was being so patient, so understanding, and yet I couldn't stop myself from looking toward the church doors every time they creaked. That's when my phone buzzed with a text. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped it as I read the message from my father. Enjoy marrying your plumber. We won't be embarrassed with you." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I excused myself and stumbled into a small side room, trying desperately to breathe through the pain. This wasn't just absence, it was deliberate cruelty. A calculated rejection on what should have been one of the happiest days of my life. I don't know how long I sat there before the door opened softly. Jake entered, breaking the tradition of not seeing the bride before the ceremony. One look at my face and he was on his knees in front of me, taking my hands. "They're not coming," I whispered. They said they wouldn't embarrass themselves by being here. Jake's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "Flora, look at me." I raised my eyes to meet his. "Family isn't just who you're born to. It's also who you choose and who chooses you. There are 50 people out there who got up early, put on their best clothes, and came to celebrate with us because they love us. That's real family." "But they're my parents," I said, the words catching on a sob. "I know," he said simply. "And that makes this inexcusable. But it doesn't make you unworthy of love. It doesn't make our marriage less valid or less beautiful." He wiped a tear from my cheek. "We can postpone if you want, or we can walk out there together and commit to building something better than what you came from. Whatever you decide, I'm with you." I looked at this man, this kind, strong, authentic man who had never once asked me to be anyone but myself, and made my decision. "Let's get married," I said firmly. "Right now." We rearranged things slightly. Instead of being walked down the aisle by Jake's father, Jake and I entered together hand in hand, a visible statement that we were already a unit, already committed to facing life as partners. The minister welcomed everyone with words about chosen family and the community of love surrounding us. Throughout the ceremony, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: profound joy in committing to Jake, lingering pain from my parents' rejection, and overwhelming gratitude for everyone who had shown up to support us. When we exchanged vows, Jake's voice was steady and sure. I was surprised to find my own voice equally strong as I promised to love him for better or worse. "I give you this ring as a symbol of my love," I said, sliding the simple gold band onto his finger, "and with it I give you my heart. I have no reservations and no doubts." And in that moment, it was absolutely true. Whatever doubt and pain my parents had inflicted washed away in the certainty of Jake's love. At the reception, Jake's parents stepped in for all the traditional roles. His mother gave a touching speech about welcoming me to their family. His father led me in what would have been the father-daughter dance. Our friends surrounded us with genuine celebration that had nothing to do with social status and everything to do with authentic connection. There were still moments when the absence of my parents hit me hard, when I caught myself looking for my father's tall figure in the crowd, or when I overheard someone asking discreetly where my family was. But those moments were balanced by the overwhelming evidence that I was in fact surrounded by family, just not the one I was born into. As Jake and I shared our first dance, he whispered in my ear, "I have something to tell you later, something important." "Is everything okay?" I asked, suddenly anxious. He smiled, that confident, steady smile I'd fallen in love with. "Everything is perfect, and about to get even better." I couldn't imagine what he meant, but the genuine happiness in his eyes reassured me. Whatever it was, we would face it together, as husband and wife. After our first dance ended, Jake took my hand and led me away from the reception hall into a quiet courtyard. The June evening was perfect, warm with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of the garden roses. From inside, we could hear the muffled sounds of music and laughter as our guests continued celebrating. "I've been keeping something from you," Jake said, his expression serious. "And today, of all days, there shouldn't be secrets between us." My heart stuttered, years of insecurity momentarily flooding back. "What is it?" Jake reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. "I wanted someone who would love me for who I am, not what I have," he began. "When we met, I saw how genuine you were, how you valued my work and didn't judge me for being a plumber. That meant everything to me." He handed me the document. "But there's more to the story than I've told you." With shaking hands, I unfolded what appeared to be property records. 3 commercial buildings in downtown Boston, all owned by Sullivan Holdings, LLC. "I don't understand," I said, looking up at him in confusion. Jake took a deep breath. "My plumbing business is real and I love the work. But 10 years ago, I used my savings to buy a small, run-down commercial property. I renovated it myself, rented it out, and used the income to buy another property, then another. He gestured to the documents. Those 3 buildings generate more annual income than most doctors or lawyers make. I'm not just a plumber, Flora. I'm also a commercial real estate investor. But that's not how I define myself, and it's not how I wanted others to define me either. I stared at him, trying to process this revelation. So all this time, I've been exactly who I said I was, a plumber who takes pride in his work. The real estate business is something I keep quiet because I wanted to be sure anyone in my life valued me for who I am, not what I'm worth. A dozen thoughts raced through my mind. Why hadn't he told me sooner? Did he not trust me? But looking at his earnest expression, I understood. In a world that constantly judged people by their titles and bank accounts, Jake had created a perfect filter. Anyone who couldn't respect him as a plumber wouldn't get to know the rest of his story. I should have told you sooner, he said, reading my expression. But at first I was just being careful, and then it never seemed like the right time, and then your parents were so dismissive that part of me wanted to prove a point. I placed my finger on his lips, stopping his explanation. I understand, Jake. I really do, and I meant it. Growing up with parents who valued status above all else had shown me exactly why someone would want to protect themselves from that kind of judgment. So what now? I asked. Do we tell everyone? Jake shook his head. I don't want to change how people see me. The people who matter accept me as a plumber, but I thought you should know the whole truth as we start our life together. I nodded, then suddenly laughed as a thought occurred to me. What? Jake asked, looking confused. My mother, Diane Wilson, built her reputation as one of the top corporate attorneys in the state, representing clients whose names regularly appeared in Fortune 500 lists. Jake's expression softened. That was never the point for me, Flora. Money doesn't make anyone better or worse than anyone else. I know that, I said, but they don't. And I can't help thinking about their faces if they knew. A mischievous idea formed in my mind. Do you have your work uniform in the car? You said you had that emergency job early this morning. Jake nodded, looking bemused. It's in my truck. Why? 20 minutes later, we had created the perfect photo. Jake stood proudly in his Sullivan plumbing uniform, holding the property documents in one hand and his master plumber's license in the other. His expression was confident, but not gloating. I stood beside him in my wedding dress, looking up at him with genuine admiration. Sarah captured the image perfectly with her professional camera. Are you sure about this? She asked as she showed me the result. I looked at the photo. It wasn't about revenge or pettiness. It was about truth, that worth isn't measured by occupation or social status. I'm sure, I said, sending the image to both my parents with a simple caption, "Meet your new son-in-law, the commercial real estate investor, still proud of his plumbing business too." Within 30 seconds, my phone exploded with incoming calls. My father, my mother, even my sister Penelope. I silenced the ringer and handed my phone to Sarah. Hold on to this for me, I said. Tonight belongs to us, and the people who showed up. Jake wrapped his arm around my waist. No regrets. I leaned into him, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and liberation. Only that it took me so long to understand what really matters. We returned to our reception, dancing and celebrating with our real family, the one formed by choice and love, rather than blood and obligation. My phone continued to vibrate in Sarah's purse throughout the night, but I didn't check it once. Whatever storm was brewing with my parents could wait until tomorrow. As we left the reception under a shower of rose petals, Jake whispered, "Ready for our life to begin." I nodded, looking at the faces of those who had truly shown up for us. It already has. What I didn't know then was that my parents weren't content to wait for my return from the honeymoon to address that revealing photo. Their response would come much sooner, and much more dramatically, than I had anticipated. Jake and I had chosen a small boutique hotel on Cape Cod for our honeymoon. Nothing extravagant, just 3 days of ocean views and privacy before returning to real life. After the emotional roller coaster of the wedding, we were both looking forward to quiet time together. The morning after the wedding, I finally turned my phone back on to find 37 missed calls, 22 voicemails, and over 50 text messages, most from my parents, but some from extended family members, and even family friends, who had apparently been enlisted in the campaign to reach me. The messages ranged from demands for explanation to expressions of outrage that we had concealed Jake's financial situation to sudden, jarring attempts at reconciliation. "They certainly changed their tune fast," I remarked to Jake as we had breakfast on our balcony overlooking the ocean. He reached for my hand across the table. "Are you going to call them back?" I set my phone down. "Not today. Maybe tomorrow. Right now, I just want to be present with you." Jake smiled. "I like that plan." We spent the day walking along the beach, having a late lunch at a seafood restaurant, and exploring this small coastal town. For those precious hours, I managed to push thoughts of my parents to the back of my mind. This time was for us, for beginning our marriage in peace and joy. That evening, as we returned to the hotel after dinner, the front desk clerk called out to us. "Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, you have visitors in the lobby." Jake and I exchanged confused glances. No one knew where we were staying except Sarah, who was feeding our cat, and Jake's parents, who would never interrupt our honeymoon. We rounded the corner to find my parents sitting stiffly on a lobby sofa, my father checking his watch impatiently, my mother scrutinizing her surroundings with barely concealed disdain. "Mom, Dad," I stopped short Jake's hand protectively at the small of my back. "What are you doing here?" They stood in unison as if choreographed. Flora, my mother, stepped forward, her voice overly bright. "We've been trying to reach you." "How did you even find us?" I asked, still stunned by their presence. My father cleared his throat. "We called every hotel in the area. It wasn't difficult." The implication that our honeymoon destination was predictably modest hung in the air, but I let it pass. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding," my father continued. "We should discuss it privately." He glanced meaningfully at Jake. "Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of my husband," I replied, emphasizing the word. My mother's smile tightened. "Of course, dear. We simply wanted to explain about yesterday. There was a scheduling conflict with a hospital board meeting your father couldn't miss. We should have communicated better." I stared at her in disbelief. After their explicit text saying they wouldn't embarrass themselves by attending, they were now claiming a scheduling conflict. "A misunderstanding," my father added smoothly. "Had we known about Jacob's additional business interests, we certainly would have made different arrangements." And there it was, the real reason for their sudden appearance. Not concern for my feelings or regret for missing their daughter's wedding, but the discovery that my husband was wealthy. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Yesterday, Jake was an embarrassment you couldn't associate with. Today, now that you know he owns commercial real estate, he's acceptable. What changed exactly? His character, his work ethic, his kindness." My father had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Flora, you're being dramatic. We always said we wanted you to marry someone with ambition and success." "No," I countered. "You wanted me to marry someone with the right appearance of success. Someone who would impress your friends at the country club. You never once asked if Jake made me happy." "We're here now," my mother interjected. "We want to make amends. Perhaps we could host a proper reception at the club when you return. Introduce Jacob to our circle properly." Jake, who had remained silent beside me, finally spoke. "With all due respect, Dr. and Mrs. Wilson, I'm still the same person I was yesterday. Still a plumber. Still proud of my work. The only difference is, now you know I also have money." My mother waved her hand dismissively. "Yes, well, entrepreneurship is certainly respectable. We can emphasize that aspect when we introduce you." I felt a surge of clarity and strength. "No, Mom. There won't be any reception at your club. You made your choice yesterday when you decided your social status was more important than your daughter's happiness." Flora, my father's voice took on the authoritative tone that had intimidated me throughout my childhood. "Don't be hasty. We're offering an olive branch here." "An olive branch," I repeated. "You sent me a text on my wedding day saying you wouldn't embarrass yourselves by attending. Do you have any idea how much that hurt? Do you even care?" "We were upset," my mother said. "People say things they don't mean when they're upset." "The problem," I said slowly, "is that I think you did mean it. And the only reason you're here now is because you discovered Jake has money. That's not love. That's not family. That's just social climbing." My father's face darkened. "You've always been difficult, Flora. Always determined to take the hard road. We're trying to make this right." "No, you're trying to save face." I corrected him. There's a difference. Jake's hand squeezed mine supportively. If you want to be part of our lives, I continued, it needs to be on different terms. You need to respect my choices, respect my husband, not just his bank account, but his work, his character, and his place in my life. You need to recognize that your values aren't the only valid ones. My parents exchanged glances. And you need to genuinely apologize, I finished. Not just to me, but to Jake as well. This is ridiculous, my father began, but my mother placed a restraining hand on his arm. Perhaps we should all take some time to cool down, she suggested, reverting to her lawyer tactics. We can discuss this when you return from your trip. I shook my head. No, Mom, this isn't a negotiation. Either you accept us, both of us exactly as we are, or you don't. But I won't keep trying to earn your approval. I'm done with that. I turned to Jake. I'd like to go up to our room now. He nodded, and we walked toward the elevator, leaving my parents standing in the lobby. Just before the doors closed, I saw my mother take a step forward, an unfamiliar expression on her face, something like fear, or perhaps regret. Back in our room, I collapsed onto the bed, emotionally drained. I'm so sorry, Jake said, sitting beside me. This is exactly why I keep my finances private. People change when money enters the picture. I looked up at him. Do you think I should forgive them? He considered the question carefully. That's entirely your decision. Forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean allowing toxic behavior to continue. You can forgive them for your own peace, while still maintaining the boundaries you just set. We talked late into the night about family forgiveness and the future we wanted to build together. By morning, I had dozens more missed calls and messages, but I maintained my distance for the remainder of our honeymoon. This time was ours, and I wouldn't let my parents' suddenly renewed interest in my life intrude on it. When we returned home, we found our porch filled with elaborate flower arrangements, gift baskets, and envelopes containing cards with lengthy, handwritten apologies. It seemed my parents had decided to try a different approach, bombarding us with material expressions of remorse. What do you want to do with all this? Jake asked as we carried the packages inside. I sighed, looking at the expensive peace offerings. I guess we see if their actions eventually match their words. The coming months would test whether my parents could truly change or if their apparent remorse was just another performance for the benefit of appearances. For the first 6 months of our marriage, I maintained limited contact with my parents. We exchanged occasional text messages and had brief, somewhat stiff phone calls every few weeks. Each conversation was like navigating a minefield. My mother carefully avoiding any mention of Jake's occupation while dropping hints about introducing us to the right people who might be interested in his real estate ventures. My father awkwardly attempting to find common ground without acknowledging the elephant in the room. Meanwhile, Jake and I settled into our life together. We bought a charming 3-bedroom house in a family-friendly neighborhood, modest by my parents' standards, but perfect for us. Jake continued to grow both his plumbing business and his real estate investments, while I took on the role of art department chair at my school. We hosted dinner parties with friends, spent Sundays with Jake's family, and began talking about starting a family of our own. The distance from my parents was both painful and healing. I missed the relationship I wished we had, while gradually accepting the reality of the one we actually did have. Through therapy and countless heart-to-heart talks with Jake, I began to understand that my parents' conditional love wasn't something I could fix. It was something I needed to acknowledge and work around. Their inability to see your worth isn't a reflection of your value, my therapist reminded me. It's a limitation in their vision. Slowly, I stopped measuring myself against the Wilson family yardstick of success. I defined achievement on my own terms. The light in a student's eyes when they mastered a new technique, the warmth of our home, the strength of my marriage, the authentic connections we built with friends and community. 9 months after our wedding, my mother called with an unusual request. Your father and I would like to have you and Jake over for dinner. Just the 4 of us. I hesitated. Is this another attempt to introduce us to someone? No, she said, and I was surprised by the lack of defensiveness in her voice. We'd just like to talk, please. After discussing it with Jake, we agreed to go setting clear boundaries beforehand about what we would and wouldn't tolerate. The dinner began awkwardly with stilted conversation about safe topics, the unusually warm weather, a new restaurant downtown, my sister's recent professional achievement. But after the main course, as my father poured wine with uncharacteristically shaky hands, something shifted. "We've been seeing a family therapist," my mother announced abruptly, at Penelope's suggestion. I nearly dropped my fork in surprise. "You have?" My father cleared his throat. "We've been doing a lot of reflection about our priorities and our behavior. Particularly regarding your wedding," my mother added, looking down at her plate. "What we did was unforgivable." I sat in stunned silence, unable to process my perfectly composed mother admitting fault. "My parents were the same way with me," she continued, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "Nothing was ever enough. Every achievement just raised the bar for the next expectation. I swore I'd be different, but instead—" She trailed off, blinking rapidly. "We measured success by such narrow metrics," my father said. "Status, money, appearance. We thought we were protecting you by pushing you toward what we saw as security. But we were wrong," my mother finished. "We were so focused on how things looked that we couldn't see what really mattered." I glanced at Jake, who gave me an encouraging nod. "Why now?" I asked. "Is it just because you found out about Jake's financial situation?" My father winced. "That was a wake-up call, yes, but not in the way you might think. It forced us to confront our own hypocrisy. The fact that we suddenly found your husband acceptable once we knew he had money, it was a mirror we couldn't look away from." "Penelope helped too," my mother admitted. "She was quite direct about how damaging our behavior has been. She said she'd been enabling us by conforming to our expectations, but watching what happened with you made her realize how toxic those expectations were." The conversation that followed was the most honest we'd ever had as a family. They talked about their own insecurities, my father's humble beginnings that he'd spent a lifetime trying to outrun my mother's desperate need for control stemming from her chaotic childhood. I shared how their conditional approval had shaped my self-worth, how I'd spent years trying to earn a love that should have been freely given. It wasn't a magical fix. Years of damage couldn't be repaired in one dinner conversation, but it was a beginning, the first genuine dialogue we'd ever had without pretense or performance. Over the following months, we continued this careful rebuilding process. There were setbacks, moments when old patterns emerged, when my mother couldn't resist a comment about Jake's work clothes, when my father lapsed into comparing my choices unfavorably to Penelope's. But now we had the language and courage to address these moments directly, rather than letting resentment build. A year after our wedding, Jake and I invited both sets of parents to our home for a special dinner. Jake cooked his famous lasagna wearing his plumbing company polo shirt with deliberate pride. My parents arrived on time, my father awkwardly complimenting the craftsmanship of our modest home's woodwork, my mother bringing a homemade pie rather than her usual store-bought offering. After dinner, Jake and I shared our news. We were expecting a baby. The joy on my parents' faces seemed genuine, not the polite performance I'd grown up with, but real emotion. "I'm going to be a grandmother," my mother whispered, tears in her eyes. Later, when Jake was showing my father his workshop in the garage, my mother joined me in the kitchen. "I want to do better with my grandchild than I did with you," she said quietly. "I don't want them to ever doubt they're loved exactly as they are." "I hope so, Mom," I replied. "That's all I ever wanted too." 2 years after our wedding at our child's first birthday party, I caught a moment that symbolized how far we'd come. My father, the distinguished surgeon, was serving cake while wearing the joke apron Jake had given him, world's most improved father-in-law. Jake stood proudly in his plumbing company uniform, having come directly from an emergency call. My mother was taking photos of everything, documenting a happiness that had nothing to do with appearances. Looking around at our mixed family, Jake's working-class relatives chatting comfortably with my parents' country club friends, my art school colleagues mingling with Jake's plumbing industry associates, I felt a sense of peace I'd never expected to find. We'd created something new here, a community based on authenticity rather than pretense. The journey hadn't been easy. There were still moments when old wounds reopened, when my parents slipped into familiar patterns, when I had to remind myself of my own worth, independent of their approval. But those moments became less frequent, less powerful. I realized that the most unexpected gift from all this pain had been freedom. Freedom from seeking validation from the wrong sources. Freedom to define success on my own terms. Freedom to build relationships based on genuine connection. rather than social advantage. That photo I sent on my wedding day, Jake, in his plumber's uniform holding property documents, now sits framed in our living room, not as a reminder of triumph or revenge, but as a symbol of authenticity. It reminds us that worth isn't determined by occupation or bank balance, that love isn't conditional, and that sometimes the most valuable thing we can do is simply be true to ourselves. If you've ever felt judged for your choices or measured against impossible standards, I hope my story reminds you that you're not alone. Family relationships are complicated. Healing isn't linear, and sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are the most necessary ones. Have you ever had to choose between authenticity and approval? Share your experience in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by others' narrow definitions of success. Thank you for listening, and remember, the family we choose can be just as meaningful as the family we're born into.